Hello, welcome to the Busy Bug Homestead. So today I'm going to be picking some strawberries right behind me. We've been pulling baskets at least every other day of strawberries out of this one bed. These I thought were a June berry. I'm not really sure because every time I pluck one off I get a whole bunch of new flowers. And cicadas are coming to say hello. So I'm not really sure what variety they are. These are the ones that I purchased for my daughter's photo shoot. I didn't keep the tag, I lost it somewhere. It was last spring and they have just multiplied. So we've been using these strawberries pretty much for fresh eating, but today I'm going to actually be using them for a cheesecake recipe that we're about to pop in the house and do. So let's grab some berries and we'll head on in and do our cheesecake. Started by chopping all the tops of our berries off, and I'm separating out the ones that I think are cute and like uniform in size to put on top for my garnish. I think I'll probably need about 8 of them. I think 6 or 8. So I'm just gonna set them to the side and chop the rest of the berries. I am gonna make this batch twice, the same recipe. The first one is what I'm doing right now. I am going to make this and strain it so that I get a clear juice to add into my cheesecake base. And then the second batch I will make later when I'm done with everything else, but I'm not going to include that in the video because you don't need to see it twice. The second one I'm not going to strain. So this first one's going to get strained. The second one's not going to get strained. And the second one is actually going to be just to put on top of the cheesecake when we eat it. I don't mind having a little extra chunks of strawberries on top of a cheesecake meant to have strawberries in it. So this first one is going to just simmer on the stove. We're looking for kind of it just to start bubbling and soften, and you want to be able to mash the berries lightly when you go to stir. So as soon as you can start pressing the berries and they give, we're pretty much almost done. And then we're gonna go ahead and strain it and get all of the strawberry flesh and seeds and everything in our strainer so we don't get that in our cheesecake base. So there's no crunch at all in our cheesecake base. We want a nice smooth base. So it is okay to press and push to try and get as much juice out as possible. This first batch, the juice came to just under half a cup, which is perfect for the base of the cheesecake. So we're gonna finish pressing this, set this to the side, let it cool completely. We don't want anything hot going into our cheesecake base. Everything should be room temperature. So next up, we're just gonna prepare our pan with some Pam and some, I like to use a circle of parchment at the bottom. I think it's easier so that it doesn't get stuck, the crust. But I am going to also spray that so that that doesn't get stuck to the bottom of a cheesecake because it's kind of hard to flip a cheesecake over and take that off. It's not like a cake layer where you could just flip it. So we're going to set that to the side and start on our cookie crust. For this part, it's going to be a very simple recipe. It's a shortbread cookie crust. It's going to be 4 sticks of unsalted butter, 1.5 cups of powdered sugar, 1 tablespoon of vanilla, and 1 teaspoon of salt. And then we're gonna add 3 3/4 cups of cake flour. So we're just going to let this mix. We want a nice, soft, fluffy butter. And we're gonna start by adding in our sugar. We wanna let those two get combined fully before we move on to our next step. We're gonna add our salt and our vanilla. I want this to get combined pretty good before we add in our flour, because we do not want to overmix with the flour. So we're going to add in our flour a little bit at a time, and we're just looking for it to be well incorporated. Flour is very easy to overmix, so we just mix until it's just combined, scrape down the sides, make sure everything is incorporated. So we're going to start putting this into the pan. This is not an easy roll out dough at this point. Normally you, with a shortbread cookie, you're gonna wanna freeze it or cool it down somehow and then roll it out. So I took the cake spatula. I found that that's the easiest way to do it. So I tried really hard to go around a couple times. I took it slow, which made sure everything was coated. I made sure all of the layers were thinner. And now I am going to not bake this crust before putting the cheesecake filling in it. If you feel like you need to pre-bake a little bit, that's totally up to you. It'd be perfectly fine. There's no eggs in this, so I wasn't worried about it. We're gonna pop that in the freezer, and then we're gonna start working on our cheesecake base while that is in the freezer. So what we wanna do to start that is get our stand mixer out. We're gonna start with our cream cheese, which we are going to whip until nice and fluffy. And I say whip, we're actually gonna use the paddle attachment. This entire thing is the paddle attachment. I just wanna go on a medium speed. So here I've got the sugar going in, and I'm just going to let the paddle run until it's fully incorporated. Scrape down the sides, make sure all that cream cheese is meeting up with the sugar. That's what makes it fluffy and delicious. And then we can start adding our eggs. Now you gotta add them one at a time. And all of these ingredients, as I mentioned before, should be at room temperature. So I'm gonna add them one at a time and let the whole egg be mixed in before I go on to the next one. So once you have that fully mixed in, all 5 eggs are in there and you can't tell that there was any dark yellow yolks floating around in there, we're going to add in our vanilla. And we're gonna let that mix in real good, and then we will go in and start adding in our flour. And again, a little bit at a time, because this will just puff right up out at you. I've done it multiple times going too fast. And then we're gonna add our sour cream. Now again, we're gonna make sure everything is scraped in and mixed well before we add our final step, because we don't want to over mix our strawberry. So we're just gonna make sure all of that cream cheese is in there, all that sugar is in there, everything is mixed up, and there's no cream cheese lumps on the bottom. Because since that was the first ingredient we put in, it tends to lump up on the bottom if it's not getting scraped well enough with your mixer. So just kind of take the time and go around. It's better to do it now than to pour it in your cake pan and find out that it wasn't mixed properly. And then we can add our strawberry in, little drizzle at a time. So we're just gonna pour it in, get a good little swirl going, get as much of that cheesecake batter in that pan, and then I'm going to place it in a water bath. Now for this water bath, I actually am using a liner for a crock pot. I don't use these typically in my crock pot, but they work great for water baths, because what I found when I try using the foil or anything else, water seems to get inside of my pan and make my crust soggy. So I use the bags so that I can use the water bath and the benefits of the water bath, which keeps the cheesecake from cracking and just overall gives you a better appearance of your cheesecake. But using the bag keeps the water out of the pan, which makes the crust not soggy. So this is just the large roasting size crock pot bag. And we're going to place it in the oven that's preheated to 325. And it's very important to place the cheesecake and pan and everything in the oven before putting your water in it. Trust me, it's a mess otherwise. We're going to let this bake for an hour and a half. But what you're looking for is when you move the pan after an hour and a half, the entire cheesecake moves as one. It doesn't jiggle in the center. Then what we're going to do is we're going to prop the door open with a pot holder or something so that that hot air can escape, but the cheesecake stays in the warmth. So we're going to want to leave it in there. If you pull your cheesecake out too early, it runs the risk of deflating. So we're going to just let it sit in the oven turned off with the door propped open for about an hour. We're going to make some fresh garnishes. So what we're going to do for garnishes is we're going to do some fresh whipped cream. Now I'm doing a stabilized whipped cream the way I do a stabilized whipped cream. I'm not sure how many other ways there are to do stabilized whipped cream, but what I'm going to be using here is a meringue powder, completely optional, but that's the stabilizer in this case. So we're just going to take our beaters in a cold bowl. I put this bowl in the freezer for about an hour with the beaters in the bowl. And we're going to start by adding our heavy cream, and only the heavy cream at this point. And we're going to turn the beaters on a medium speed and just go until we get a nice frothy, bubbly cream. You'll notice it's starting to thicken up a little bit, but it's not super thick just yet. It's just got those bubbles on top where you can tell that it is starting to become whipped cream. And at this point, this is where we're going to add in our meringue powder. Now, you might benefit from sifting these ingredients. I didn't bother to sift these ingredients. I don't really notice the flavor difference or the texture difference when I don't sift it. But we're just going to keep beating with the meringue powder in there until we get to a pudding-like consistency. At which point, when we get to a pudding consistency, you'll start to see the little lines when you pull the beater around. They're going to melt back into the mix, but you're going to see the lines, and that's your indication that it's time to add the powdered sugar. So we're gonna mix until it starts to resemble that beautiful whipped cream texture that we all love in our whipped cream. We do not want to overmix. Overmixing will actually cause this to turn into butter. So when we get to the point where it's looking like whipped cream, we're gonna add our vanilla in and only give it a little bit of mixing to incorporate that vanilla. Once it's all mixed in, we stop, we check for our peaks, make sure it's nice and stiff, but not too stiff, and we are good to go. So here, I'm going to use a piping bag. It's completely optional. You can honestly just dollop this on top if you just want to eat it fresh. I'm making it fancy. So I'm going to use a piping bag and make some little swirls on top. And by this point, it's been 24 hours. Our cheesecake is ready to come out of its saran wrap. And I'm going to take a cake spatula and just go around the edges. My edges weren't stuck. I just wanted to make sure because I did not want to open that spring form and have it pull apart my cookie crust. So I went around all the way and kept that spatula handy until this cheesecake was completely out of its pan, just in case there's any sticking. You never know. We sprayed, but it could still happen. Just very gently. Don't go ripping it off. Make sure you're keeping everything smooth. And now I know that this looks uncooked, but it's not. It absorbed all of the moisture from the cheesecake and it didn't get any light, or it didn't get any direct heat, I guess. So it didn't get the brown crisps like the top did, but you could see around the edges that actually has that brown crispiness that a cookie would have. Underneath that, because it wasn't exposed, it didn't. So yeah, so I just did my rosettes and I'm gonna add the strawberries that we put to the side with the little stems on them because that's how they're adorable. And then for my next garnish, I baked off some of that extra cookie, and I also dyed some of the extra cookie with the pink. I just put 2 drops of food coloring in and shook up some cookie crumbs to make my pink cookie crumbs. Just because I thought I gave it a little extra character. And we were good to slice. Slice and have our first piece of strawberry cheesecake with strawberries fresh picked from the garden. No better way to eat a strawberry cheesecake, in my opinion. And now that extra strawberry reduction we made where we didn't strain it out, that's where this is about to come into play, because I made that just after the other one and put it in the fridge so that I can have a nice drizzle of beautiful strawberry glaze on top, which only enhances the flavor. You can't go wrong with more strawberry. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.